We're going to start on Ayin, on 70. We're one page behind. 70, A, second to the top line. We had a machlekes yesterday, Rabbi and Rav Huna, regard to a bechar that's born. Is it considered holy from the time the majority of it is born? From then and on it's holy? Or is it retroactively holy? Once the majority is born, it goes back to what it was really originally, and the whole thing was holy from the very beginning. So the difference, two differences. One was, if you sold the first third of its coming out of its birth, you sold that to a non-Jew, would it be considered sold? If it's only holy from then and on, after the majority comes out, then it was sold. It wasn't holy before. It was a valid sale. But if we say it goes retroactively, that once the majority is born, it goes back, that it was holy the whole time, then how did you sell that? It wasn't yours to sell. Now, at the time, it appeared to be yours, but when it's born, it goes back retroactive. It was never yours. The other difference was, if it came out through a cesarean, the first third, and then it was born, but at the time that the majority came out, it was born naturally. It was natural birth. So if I go back and I look at it originally, well, when the majority coming out was not really through the opening of the womb, it was a cesarean, so then it won't be holy. Exactly the opposite. And if I say that no, only from the time and onward, from the time the majority comes out and onward it's holy, then I say that this is a bechar. So Tanan, there's a Mishnah from a Bakeres. It's actually our Mishnah. A woman that's giving, not a woman, a female animal that's giving birth for the first time. Hamakasha leilid, and it's having difficulty in its labor. Mechatech ve'ever, the shepherd, whatever, is allowed to cut off limb by limb, umashlach leklavim, and throw it to the dogs. This is very interesting. How is he allowed to throw it to the dogs? Well, it's not holy yet. That's why. But are we talking about that he's throwing it to the dogs before the majority comes out, or is he talking about throwing it to the dogs after the majority comes out? That would make a big difference here. My love, mechatech uminiach. The Gemara suggests that maybe it's referring to that he cuts it, he leaves it until it's born, and then afterwards he gives the dogs to eat. But at that point, retroactively, according to Rav Huna, it goes back, and we see that it was holy. You can't throw things that were holy to the dogs over there, and you have to bury it. So Gemara says, if we accept the opinion of Rav Huna, that it goes back retroactively, you cover me, Eily, it should have been buried. We're on Ayin, 70A, probably one, I don't know.
Yeah. 6 lines.
6 lines from the top. The Gemara says, lie. That's not the case. That was a very easy answer. We're not talking about that that you're holding on to it. You cut it off. Right now it wasn't born the majority, so you quickly throw it to the dogs. Cut off another piece, quickly throw it to the dogs. When the majority comes out, then we'll discuss what you need to do. But right now you were allowed to throw it to the dogs.
Wasn't right.
Wasn't right yet, so it wasn't considered.
1/3 comes out.
1/3 is fine.
And
you throw it to the dog.
No
throw
problem.
Right.
It's not anything. The status is not yet.
Right. What are you going to do? You have to take it back now? It doesn't say. Okay. Now, the Gemara goes on and says, Aval mechatich uminiach. But if you would actually leave it, what would the din be? You cover. You would have to bury it. This could be said as a question, or it could be read as a statement. It depends if you recognize the follow-up question. The Tana Seifa, in place of saying in the Seifa, Yatzaruba you cover. See, the Gemara discusses like this. This is a common strategy that the Gemara uses, that if we're going to make a contrast in the Reisha, in the first case of the Mishnah, between two cases, a minor contrast. For example, in our case, it says that if you leave it, you can't throw it to the dogs. You need to bury it. And but if you don't leave it, you can immediately throw it to the dogs. I have the full contrast there. So the Gemara asks, we said that if it's born less than the majority, you can cut off limb by limb and throw it to the dogs. If it's the majority, then you have to bury it. That was the seifa. If it's the majority, then you have to bury it. The Gemara is going to ask, why do you have to say if the majority is born, then you have to bury it? You can go back to the first case and get that contrast right in the first case. That if you throw it right away to the dogs, that's fine, but if you leave it, then you have to bury it. Notice the first case itself had both halachas. Why do you have to give me a contrast like that? You could have divided the first case itself into two parts. When do I say that I'm allowed to throw it to the dogs? That's if I threw it right away. But if I leave it, I have to bury it. So therefore, the fact that it didn't do that, that tells me that there really is no contrast in the first case. It's only if majority was born, then I have to bury it. But if I cut it off right away, then I don't have to bury it. Why? Because I say that it doesn't go back retroactively. It's a proof to Rabbi. Let's see it inside. It says, instead of the Seifa saying Yatzaru b'yikaver b'niftara menachera, that if the majority comes out, you have to bury it, and the mother doesn't have another firstborn fetus, another firstborn child. Liflik v'lisnei bedida, let it divide and teach it with itself. That means divide the first case into two cases. When do I say that I'm allowed to throw it to the dogs? If I throw it limb by limb immediately. But if I cut it off and I leave it there, you cover, I would have to bury it. Why didn't it say that? It must be because it's not true. You can also throw it to the dogs because it's not retroactive. Gemara says, actually, this is exactly what the Mishnah is saying, even though it didn't say that contrast, but this is what it means.
There's no difference there's no time difference once it comes. In other words, in terms of when you can throw it to the dogs at any time, in other words.
That's what we're saying here now. The Gemara says, now the Gemara is saying, no, actually you can't. Because, this is exactly what it's saying. When do I say that you can throw it to the dogs? That's right away. But if you cut it off, those limbs, and you leave it until it's born, it becomes as if the majority came out and it needs to be buried. In this case also needs to be buried just like the majority was born. In other words, those limbs that were cut off before the majority came out are just like the majority came out, and it all needs to be buried. Does this mean that we're going to edit the Mishnah? No. It just means that we have to read the Mishnah with more, to analyze the Mishnah a little bit differently. And the Mishnah was already set in place, and we read into the Mishnah sometimes more than what the Mishnah actually said. Philosophically, the way they did that was because officially we weren't allowed to write the oral Torah. So then when we wrote the oral Torah, when it was written down, we still left some things that needed a tradition that goes along with it. It's not perfectly written. We still have some...
There was an usher to not write down the
Yeah.
Shabbat.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the way it's explained. Okay, we're going to have a bunch of questions here from different rabbis. Rava, Ravacha, Marba Ravashi, Rabbi Yemria, and Reb Zera. Let's go through them. Boy Rava. Yeah. We start in the middle. It could be it's Rabbah, but let's see who they quote here. No, they don't tell me anything. It's Rava down here. It's in the center of the period of the Amiram. Rava's question is, do we follow the majority by limbs? Or do we not follow the majority by limbs? The Gemara needs to explain what the question is. Hey Chidami, what's the scenario where you have this question? Eily, very interesting. the majority is born. If I look at the majority of the whole thing, it's born. But if I look at the limb that's making the majority, that very last limb that came out, you don't have the majority of that limb. You only have a minority of that limb. So
You don't until the whole animal comes out, you won't know what the majority is.
oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point.
That
Yeah,
volume.
you know how big the animal is.
Anyways,
You don't know how that this.
You estimate. You're estimating.
I'll tell you the
You're
answer.
estimating.
X-ray.
Rule of nines. Each extremity is 9% of the total surface area of the body, and we use it in burns. So I mean, we know that
Okay.
if one foreleg, I mean, I don't know in an
9%.
animal, but I'm sure they have some kind of similar equivalent.
What's 9%?
In other words, the arm is 9%,
Right.
the legs are 9% each. You know, the torso is 18%. I mean, there's
Wow.
there's a percentage for humans, and I'm sure there's an equivalent for animals.
Wow. Wow, that's great. Okay, you here?
There we go.
How many nines does it take to make a majority?
Since it's Hasidic or not.
Well, they say if there's 9, there's 10. So, if we say that the majority came out, but what created the majority was the minority of the limb. So if I look at this detail, I have the minority. If I look at the whole organism, I have the majority. The kamiboyle, and a question is like this: Hai miut de broi. This little bit that's outside. Basaroiv de Ever Shadinala. Do I apply it? Do I judge it by the majority of the limb? And as I look at it in its small little organism of the separately, that this limb majority is inside, and therefore it's not, this animal is not really born yet, because the minority came out, but the majority of this limb is inside. I can't consider it born. If I look at the big organism, that this is a whole fetus, and the majority is now out, so I'll consider it part of the majority of the fetus. Gemara says pshita, it's obvious. We say here it's obvious. It's actually not so obvious because the Gemara is going to bring it. But the Mishnah is teaching me this halacha. But right now we say it's obvious that how would we do this? The leish of kinan ruba de uber vazlin basaray favor. It's obviously that we do not neglect. We don't leave the larger organism and say that we're going to follow the small limb here, and say that it's really inside, it's still not born yet, because the majority of this one limb is inside, is still unborn. The majority of the embryo is out. So this one limb, which is minority out, for sure I'm gonna put that little minority, and I'm gonna consider it part of the entire embryo, not just say that it's part of the limb. The Gemara says that that's obvious. We'll see, it's not so obvious. Ella, rather, what's the case over here where Rava has a question? Very interesting. You don't have the majority out. You only have half out. However, what's making it half out, half born? The majority of one limb. The kamiboyle. That little bit that's inside. Mahu. What do we do with that little bit? Lemishte basaroi vever. Do I consider it as part of the roi vever? As part of the majority? Do I send it after the majority? Of this one small limb, and I say that it's considered born. So in other words, when it's half and half, but one of them is the majority born, one of those limbs is majority born, do I say that the minority follows its own small limb majority? Okay. The Gemara says like this, Tashema. Come and listen. Yatsa Rubai, if the majority of the fetus is exited, was born, Harezi you cover. Then it needs to be buried. Why? Because it's a firstborn animal. That's a bechar. It's a sacrifice. And it was dead. Yeah, because he cut it. That's the way we learned the Mishnah. This is our Mishnah. Yatzaru by Harezi you cover.
I'm saying Tashma, this is a brisa?
Tashma is actually our Mishnah. Yatzaruba, it's right back here.
Oh, that's what we were learning before.
Yatzaruba, Yorezi covered. My Rubai. What's the majority? Eily merubay mamish. If we say that it's the majority, that it's actually just simple the majority. Ad hashtalei ashminan derubay kakulei. We don't know anywhere else that the majority is like the whole thing. Elalav k'yin sheyetzechetze brei. We must be that there's a chiddush here. This is like someone said. I forget how the whole story, but Menachem, so he's making a sign for his store. He says, "Can't everyone see what I'm selling? Can't everyone see that this is the front entrance?" And then there's no sign. So it's so obvious.
Yankel's fresh fish for sale. We know it's Yankel. We know we're selling it. We know it's fish. He wouldn't sell it if it wasn't fresh. And he comes over piece by piece, and the guy comes and says, "What do you have over here?"
So the Gemara says, "Don't we know already that Rubei Kekulei, that the majority is everything? Yeah, we need another Mishnah to tell me that. There must be a chiddush here. So it must be, what's the chiddush? That it's really not the majority. It's really only half. But it's half where the majority of one small limb came out, but it's only half of the fetus. And the chiddush is that it's considered entirely born. So the Gemara says, "Loi." Who says that's the case? No. It's exactly the first case, that the majority came out, but what made it the majority was the minority of one limb. And now, v'kamash malan, and the chiddush here is of our Mishnah, is that I don't take that minority that just came out and apply it back inside because the majority of that little limb is inside and say that it's not really the majority that's out. Rather, I say that I put the minority of that limb after the whole embryo, and I consider it born. So what we said before, what was obvious, is now not so obvious. That's the chiddush of our Mishnah. The chiddush of our Mishnah is that we don't take that little limb and apply it to, and say that we're only looking at this small limb and put the minority after the majority, which is unborn. Rather, I take that little piece of this limb and I put it into the whole embryo. The chiddush is that I don't say that I don't neglect the majority of the whole fetus. Okay, that was Rabbi's first question. Do we have an answer for it? No. Because his question was half and half. If it's half and half, but the majority of the limb that made it half is outside, we said that we didn't have a proof for that. Boy, Rabbi asked another question. This is difficult for. There's some vagueness here in this question. Maybe in the art scroll it's better explained. But here, we'll read it through and you'll see if you have better explanations. Karchi b'siv. We're talking about that what sanctifies this firstborn is when it goes through, when it opens the womb. Now, let's say it comes out of the womb, but it doesn't actually touch the wall of the uterus or the cervix or the birth canal, whichever one is the critical thing here. It doesn't actually touch it. Why? Because somehow they put something in there to surround it as it comes out, like a forceps type of thing, that it's helping it come out. So here, the first case is they wrapped it in the material that's on the palm tree, that like cloth sort of material that looks like. B'talisema, let's say he wraps it in his talis. Now, even if we say that, that's going to be that it wasn't really born because it was taken out through this other entity. B'shel yasema, what about if it was wrapped in a placenta? Gemara says, B'shel yasei, that's orchihu, that's a normal thing. Why would you even consider that to be separating the... So Gemara says, actually, B'shel yacheres. You took some other placenta from some other birth and you wrapped this one up. So that's not normal still, but nevertheless it's the same material. So even though it's not considered... It's possibly not the birth because you wrapped it up. Didn't open the womb. What's the din?
It could be the placenta from another animal,
right?
The sister animal inside the womb.
Oh, that is interesting. That's
interesting.
interesting.
It says up here could be like the sister. That's inside.
Very good, very good. That's a good explanation.
So normally it would just be that the water didn't break and it came out intact inside the sac.
Yeah, we had to go through the building canal.
Huh?
Right,
So
right. But if that's the case, the Gemara says that's considered normal. So It's the sack of the sister. What he's saying, and that was inside.
Rabbi Hananel says.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It says that.
Okay.
The footnote says. Didn't put the-
Okay. Because I know there's a Rabbi Hananel coming up. B'shilya acheres. Oh, no. Okay. Rabbi Hananel has a different girsa. Instead of acheres, his girsa is achaisei. Karachtei achaisei. Karachtei achaisei. He has a different version of the text. So, okay. Whatever the case is. What's it then? Karachtei va'achastei va'itziasei ma'u. You wrapped it up in the hands, like the whoever was helping there, took it out. Gemara says, "Hey chidami, what's the case that we're dealing with here? Idenafach derech reishe. If it comes out the head first, well, the head comes out patrase. It already is considered born because that's the opening of the womb. The head comes out. That's considered the birth. Ela denafach derech magalaysev. It must be that it came out breech, right? The feet come out." And then he was able to grab it and wrap it up before the majority comes out. And then when the majority comes out, it's already wrapped up. The question is that considered born? You know, these are very not really practical questions. We're discussing these questions just to see what's the point here of what creates the obligation. That's what we're discussing. It's a theoretical question. But there was a discussion. One of the rabbis in Israel, his daughter couldn't conceive. She couldn't have children, and there was a discussion of her problem was that by the time her period was over, she wasn't. And then to wait the 7 days,
She had a
the
short
ovulation,
period,
the
so
ovulation
she never had
was
time
she wouldn't
for
be able
ovulation.
to. They were trying to figure out how to resolve that halachically, so that she should be able to conceive. So one of the suggestions was that if the nida blood would not come through the cervix and all of that, somehow they could insert something that it would. Because it's only when she feels it in the flesh, it's the sensation of the feeling of the blood. Bibsara, it says. So this would, she would never become tamei. There were different suggestions of how to do this, but it's not totally irrelevant. There is some relevance to it. Wow. It's not only theoretical.
Did she never conceive it?
I don't think she had children. I don't think. Then her father was a very important rabbi. He made other interesting suggestions that she not go to the mikveh 1 month. And that way you don't have to wait the 5 days the following, because she had interesting suggestions.
I think nowadays, last time I came across that, they solved it basically by birth control pills to regulate the period. And then
right.
The main idea is that instead of being every 28 days, the typical person you're discussing had, let's say, a period every 3 weeks. And since the person ovulates 2 weeks before the next period, so the 2-week period came out during the Zman of the Nida, and therefore one couldn't catch the other, and that's perhaps he had to lengthen the period. I mean, that's the medical situation.
Okay, so the next case, this is very not practical. But Balasi Chulda, it gets swallowed by a weasel, Vahitziyasai, and the weasel takes it out. Mahu, what's the halacha? So it came out in the weasel's stomach. The Gemara says, "Heitziyasei." The weasel took it out. Ha-pikte. The weasel took it out. So this is, of course, not considered the opening of the womb. This is not a firstborn.
It's the origin of the saying, "Pop goes the weasel."
Or the weasel ate my homework.
Ella, rather listen to this. It gets even better. Balasai, vaitziyasai. It swallowed it. It popped out. V'chnisasai. It entered back in. V'kiyasai, and then it threw it up. So now the embryos, the fetus is back inside the mother. V'yatzimelav, and now it comes out on its own. This is for the second time. Mahu, what's the din? Is this considered the opening of the womb? If you took two wombs, I guess back to back, and you put them together, it left the first mother and it went into some other one. So what's the din? Didei patar, its own womb it opened, but lav didei loy patar. But the other womb that it just entered, it didn't open that womb. Or maybe it opened the second womb as well. In other words, this unnatural way of birthing, and now exits the second womb. Is that considered that it exempts the next mother, for the next animal?
It's the first case of in vitro fertilization.
Right. Right.
Outside
They
of
stuck
one
it in.
womb and then put it in the other one. We use a test tube. Here they used another animal.
Very interesting.
Not so.
Here, the commentary says that the note says the commentaries say that these things could never happen in actual practice, but then it says that modern biology, it shows that it could happen in certain cases, like the transplanting of fetuses and surrogate brothers.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Hey, I didn't go to medical school for none.
There was the head of the genetics at Columbia is this from fellow that he spoke at the Torah and Science conference, and he was saying that he does a Daf Yomi, and he's studying the third chapter of Nida, where it discusses all these interesting births, and he's saying that it's so not relevant, but then he said that he says for many hundreds of years it wasn't relevant, but he says, but I make this stuff in my laboratory. Anyway, Boy Ravacha. Now we have Ravacha. Ravacha's asking a question, and where's Ravacha? Ravacha's down here. He's under Ravika, under Abaya. Niftachu kaisli beisarechem mahu. If it opened up so wide that the animal exited without touching the walls, mahu avir rechem makdish? Is it the ear space of exiting the womb that makes it sanctified? V'hayika, and that you have. Or maybe it's the touching of the sides that sanctifies it. And you don't have that. Boy Mar Baravashi. Now we're down to the bottom, the very last name on the page. Nekru kaisle beisarechem. If the walls of the uterus are detached, the Gemara says, Mahu, what's it then? The Gemara says, Nekru lesnu, it's not there. What do you mean it doesn't open up if it's not there? It says, Ela Nekru, it's detached, but it's hanging down. So, what's it then? Do they only sanctify the firstborn while it's in its place? But if it's not in its place, it doesn't sanctify it. Or maybe it sanctifies it even when it's not in its place. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks Reb Zera. That's right over here, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Reb Zera. They're a famous pair of asking questions. Nigmamu kaisle beisarechem mahu. I think nigmu mean either it thinned out or it or pieces fell off of the walls of the uterus. Amrlei konak. This is Rabbi Yirmiyah asking Reb Zera, what's going to be the din with the animal that now comes out? Is it considered sanctified as a firstborn? So he says, Nagat b'boy di boylon. You've touched on a question that we've already asked. The boy Reb Zera, because Reb Zera asked the question. This is himself. V'amrila b'boy minei Reb Zera merabasi. There's some say that Reb Zera asked of Rabasi. Oimid meruba ala paretz v'yatzu derech paretz. Let's say the majority of the uterus is still there. There was this thing in Hilchas Nida about the pieces of the uterus like disintegrating and falling out, and there was a discussion if the woman was tamei as it was disintegrating. So here, something is falling is falling apart here. Something is disintegrating, and the animal is not coming. The majority of the uterus is still intact, but the animal doesn't come out through the opening. It comes out through the what's now fallen off. Through the parts that's now fallen off. So.
The cervix.
But does it have any better explanation there?
I'm not following the example.
I think there's pieces of the uterus that are falling off, and the embryo is coming out, the fetus is coming out, but it's not opening up the uterus because the uterus, maybe it's
That's what happens with a first trimester abortion, which where or a miscarriage, where it's so tiny, and the woman starts bleeding, nebuch, and then the products of conception, which is the fetus, is so small it goes through the canal, but you don't have this opening.
Here, we're not saying that it's just not opening. We're saying that parts of the uterus are falling off, are disintegrating.
Well, it's got to come out from the lining of the uterus, so that's parts of the uterus.
No, but we're talking about not the inner lining. We're talking about the whole outer part. Yeah,
that's weird.
Okay.
Unicorn.
Definitely weird.
So, the majority is still there, but it's coming through the hole. Or another case, parts mirabal. The majority is not there of the uterus. But it's coming through whatever's left. What's it in there? This is only when you have something left. And over there, Rab Zera had a question from Rabasi. But if it's so thinned out that there's nothing left, that we never had a question. And so therefore, what it's saying is that if it just dissolved, the uterus dissolved, so then it wouldn't be considered sanctified. Okay. Get into a different topic here. We turn the page on the top of Ayin. And this is discussing tumah, because an animal that dies is considered a nevela, and it imparts tumah. So now, behema shemeis ubra b'toich me'ah, an animal that the fetus died before it was born. Okay. But the shepherd sticks his hand in v'nagabai, maybe to help it give birth, so it doesn't have to carry this. So, but he touches the dead fetus, the dead embryo. So, whether it was a kosher animal that he's dealing with, whether it was a camel, a donkey,